Greetings, I'm Reverend Qiyamah Rahman, and on behalf of Souurce Incorporated, I welcome you. I welcome you to the beginning of Souurce Conversations. And today we have Barbara Corprew, who is the creator of All Souls Black History Project, and it honors and celebrates the many Black lives of those who were present in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and they anticipate going forward to be able to capture more history of those currently present and active at All Souls. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am so excited. Number one, what you are doing is so important. And as you and I were talking, not all share the passion and enthusiasm that we share, because we understand the significance and importance of this work. And so thank you for being a visionary and recognizing the significance of your contribution. So why don't we just begin at the beginning? How did you conceive of this project and what made you want to be involved with it?
Sure. First, let me just say that I'm a product of the Sunday school at All Souls. I started going to All Souls in 1959. I'm 73 now. And when I joined, the head of the RE program was Bernice Just. She was Black, and she was the first person of color who was hired at All Souls. So I have a personal interest in this history, and for me, it's lived history, because many of the people that are identified in the narratives are people I knew. But to answer your question about why it is and how it is that I was interested in this project and came to become involved in it and really direct it, is that in December 2020, our interim minister, Reverend Kathleen Rowlands, began hosting Zoom conversations about the 200th anniversary of the church, which was coming up. And these conversations got us brainstorming about when and how we could celebrate, and got us thinking about the kinds of projects and ideas we might want to take on. I got going on this project in April of 2021. And while I had thought about doing a smaller research project years before about Bernice Just, who I had just mentioned to you, I hadn't really pursued it. But because the bicentennial was coming up, I thought this would be a time when I could focus on more than just one person. And so, I looked at all the people that I knew and remembered as I was growing up, and decided that I would focus on honoring those members who were no longer with us, who many in the congregation, Black and white, never knew. So I also was prompted to do this because Reverend Rowlands had asked the archives, I guess you could call it committee of our church, to provide her the name of the first African-American family that joined the church, because she wanted to do a sermon on that family. And of course, they had no idea who that person was, because none of them were there. So they reached out to me, and I was able to provide information on who that family was as far as I knew it. But it also fixed in my mind the fact that it was my story to tell. And I was uniquely positioned to provide information on all of the people that I remembered as being firsts, as being early members from the 40s and 50s and 60s. And so that's how I got started.
Wow. That's an inspiring story.
I mean, to give you more of an indication of this, I mean, for example, one of the featured people in the narratives is Dr. Ruth Lloyd. She was the first African-American woman to get a PhD in zoology and the sixth in the country to get a PhD in a STEM area. She was a professor at Howard Medical School and taught anatomy. She taught my mother anatomy.
Wow.
Another person, Dr. Roland Scott, was an expert in the field of sickle cell disease. He was my pediatrician.
Wow.
So, I mean, you know, again, I mean, and that's just a few of the people, but it just gives you some indication of how I knew who these people were and how I could share my knowledge of who they were when it was hard to tell whether we had many Black members and who they were.
So talk a little bit about, so once you were inspired first by the inquiry from Kathleen, Reverend Kathleen, and you began to provide that information, what made you decide that you wanted it to be something bigger than what they were simply asking for, and that you wanted some kind of permanent record documentation of the past Black members at All Souls? How did you make that leap?
Well, the leap was pretty easy. And the leap was easy because I had to do research myself to sort of be sure that I was right about who were the first members of the church. You know, I was born in 1949. So in terms of knowing who members were, I mean, I wasn't a member in 1949, you know, so I had to look through the church's records and look at membership cards and church directories to try and identify the early Black members, let alone figure out and ferret out those who had passed versus those who were still living. So it was a bigger project in terms of, you know, the universe of people that I was looking for. So once I began seeing who all were members and when they joined, I realized that these people were so amazing that I had to broaden the project.
You touched on something that I think is important, and that is the sources of information that we don't always readily go to. The membership cards, membership book, or however that information is gathered, church directories. I'm noticing that the mid-size and large-size congregations tend to be more, if not organized, more intentional in terms of archival information, which makes it a little easier to do this kind of research. Also, because of their size and their budgets, they oftentimes may have a part-time or even a full-time person designated for the archives, which they combine oftentimes with a library, so on and so forth. So talk to me in terms of the fiscal and human resources that you had available to you.
Sure. Let me just say that one of the principal challenges of doing this research is access to archival information. And that's very hard in church communities, period, because it doesn't start in 1980. It has to start earlier than that.
Right.
And it's not going to take money from a church budget. It's going to take volunteers who are interested in history, keeping it, organizing it, making it available, digitizing it as years go on.
Yeah.
But identify records that they can keep that can be used in research. And that's tough. And let me just say, depending upon the quality of that information, it may or may not be the resource you hope it is. For example, membership cards. They're not going to tell you whether someone is Black.
Right.
They're just going to give you a name and when they join. And sometimes what they will do is tell you when they left or that they requested to leave the church. They may not tell you when the person died. So, you know, and they will tell you about a spouse, and sometimes they will tell you about kids. Membership directories. In our case, we had membership directories going back to 1955.
Wow.
But again, the membership directories did not have pictures going back to 1955. Generally speaking, membership directories weren't pictorial directories until the late 60s or early 70s. So all I had from the beginning were names and addresses that I might be able to recognize because I would recognize that such and such was someone I knew or someone who was Black. But, you know, I wouldn't know the universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, archival information becomes important because it's where you start.
Exactly.
And you need to find out what they keep and whether or not it's organized. I mean, these were organized cards that were in like file drawers alphabetically and kept meticulously that way up until they started doing membership online and using a computer. So for members that may have joined in 2000, there may not be a member card. You know, it's online. It's somewhere on a computer. So if I was looking at someone who may have joined in 2017 and died in 2022, I may not find a card, which meant that I would not be able to write anything about them.
Right.
But I'm just sort of giving you, you know, what the challenges are, but what you need to look for to get started. Because if you don't have that, then all you have are the memories of those members who still exist.
And that's, yes, that's the second line of research. Right. So the first line of research is to really do an assessment of the archival resources that are available, because so they may be in boxes stowed away on shelves or in closets. They can be any place depending on the level of organization and the intentionality around.
That's right. And you need to ask for a master list of what they have, because that'll tell you. I mean, it will tell you whether or not we have employment records, which is how I would know when the first person of color was hired. Okay. You need to know whether there is a death file where they may keep memorial programs, because again, one of the resources that you're going to look for is a memorial program or obituary that will tell you something about the person.
Mm.
And our church keeps a death file. Now, it's not complete. You know, they will have some member memorial programs, but not others. But it's something that would show up on a master list of what documents they keep. That's how I knew, for example, that they had directories going back to 1955.
Mm-hmm. And what about the death file? How far back did it
You know,
go?
I can't say. It's done alphabetically, so you
Okay.
wouldn't necessarily know.
I
All
got you.
you would have to go into the alphabet for the person you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So that's the first line of research. The what do we call those? The primary sources.
That's right.
So the secondary sources would be what you were saying in terms of individuals doing possible interviews, identifying individuals that may have been present early on. So that would be some of the elders in the congregation. It might be some of the ministers that served that may remember particular individuals, particular events and incidents that occurred. So those interviews are an important source of information, would you say?
Yes, but I didn't go to the interviews next. And I'll explain why. I
Okay.
started Googling
Ah,
first. And I started Googling because for most of these people, I did not know if they were living or dead.
ah,
You see, I mean, if you're looking to identify and honor those who are no longer with us, you need to find out whether they're dead or not.
there you go. Yeah.
Not everybody who dies has an obituary,
Mm.
but you can generally find obituaries by Googling the person's name and, you know, the state,
Mm-hmm.
and hoping that, or the paper.
Ah.
So if it's Washington, D.C., you would do the name and the Washington Post, or just do the name and D.C. and see what you get.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then that way you identify and put together a list of those people who you think are Black. And then again, those people who you know from that list who are dead, as
Right.
opposed to currently living. For example, I uncovered a number of people who I knew were Black, but who turned out to be living. Andrew Brimmer was a member at one time. He was on the Federal Reserve Board, the first Black on the Federal Reserve Board. Donald McHenry, who was the first ambassador to the UN, was a member. He's still living. So, you know, you never know. They joined early in the early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, again, they're still living.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to recall when you do a search for a death certificate, I believe, because I only did it for a relative, that you have to have some connection in order for them to release that information. Did you ever do that?
I know. I was never looking for a death certificate.
Mm.
I essentially was looking for an obit that would appear in a newspaper.
Mm.
You know, it's rare that I would be looking for a death certificate.
Mm.
So if I were you, and if you're looking to, you know, identify members who have passed, I would Google, see whether or not you could find, you know, an obituary anywhere. And usually there are some tributes either on the funeral home site, which you might find by Googling.
Mm.
Okay. I mean, even if it isn't in the newspaper, a relative may post something on the funeral home website.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, if you're still unsure, that's the individual you'll talk to other individuals about.
Mm. Okay.
You see? But it is in the process of Googling, you might find out, for example, because his or her papers may have been donated to their university.
Yes, yes.
You may have found out that, you know, another relative has done a tribute, or a friend has done a tribute, or that they received an award. And it will give you a year, some dates that will help you identify whether or not they might still be here. Or you might figure out how old they might be. If they're 101, you might know that they may not still be with us.
Right. You raised an interesting point in terms of donated papers. So for those that may be in academia or simply were published, that's an area that I find myself oftentimes tapping into. I'm encouraging youth to submit their papers and to think about this in terms of our seminaries, Meadville Lombard Theological School, Starr King School for the Ministry, and Harvard University has a lot of UU documents. I found myself, I was trying to track this minister. We did find the obituary. However, we wanted a picture. To this day, we have not found a picture. I cannot believe it. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because I was directed to Harvard. They the Ministerial Fellowship Committee sends their documents there. So they had her application to the MFC, and I was able to extract some information from that. And to be able to include her in the upcoming anthology. Otherwise, because she's deceased and we could not locate relatives, even friends, we could not, we wound up not having a picture, but we had some content, her own words that she described her ministry, her potential ministry, because this was initially her applying. So it becomes like detective work sometimes.
It does, but you luck up. I mean, you sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not. The other thing is, sometimes depending upon where the papers land, because they could also land in like a presidential library too.
Really?
With military people.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Oh, yes. But I've got to just tell you, I mean, apart from libraries, university libraries, you've got StoryCorps, you got history makers, you've got.
You have to send me a list. I sent you a list, and those are very early results of early research. And I'm trying to revise that list so that there are more current.
But it may turn on exactly where people are. Because, for example, in DC, the DC Historical Society may have information that they've gotten because there were interviews done during, their examinations of neighborhoods. That happened in one case that I had. But I appreciate how difficult it is to find certain things.
Yeah.
The other thing is you may have to pay for it.
To obtain the information?
To obtain the information. Sometimes you can get it, sometimes you can't. For example, in my situation, I found videos. I found a video of Hilda Mason Remembered that was given by the organization. It was a nonprofit that had done it to GW. And I had to get permission to use that video.
Oh, yeah.
With one other person who was military, his papers had gone to Columbia University, as well as to several presidential libraries. But Columbia requested a release and a fee. Now, with respect to pictures, pictures are also hard, and I had difficulty with some. But sometimes if you can find family, you can find them. Sometimes by Googling, you might get an old picture, or from a memorial program, you might have a picture or an old article. An obituary usually has a picture, although now most obituaries, if they have a picture, the family has paid money to put the picture in there. Whereas before, you know, the newspapers would take a picture and do it gratis. Now I think they charge for a picture. But pictures can be tough. And one of the other problems you may have, and I just note this, is that when you're talking about Black people and biracial people, you may or may not be able to tell if they're Black.
True.
Which means that you're still going to have to, in some instances, talk to people who may have known them. Because there were a couple of people where, you know, I had assumed that they were Black, but they weren't Black. But the pictures were such. And then there were some that were so fair that I knew that they were Black. But if I had just looked at the picture, I would not have known.
So,
is this all helpful?
This is extreme. I don't know if you noticed, I'm taking notes. I want to go back to donated papers because we oftentimes think about high visibility individuals, maybe celebrities, donating their papers. But I want to say this. So I've done a fair amount of traveling and moving around, and I've had different lives, and the period of time that I worked in the area of violence against women was not as relevant to my UU life. And yet this was important research and papers and things. And I knew that Meadville would not necessarily benefit from having that. And a friend happened to mention, I was in Atlanta at the time. She said, Georgia State University has a women's resource center and they would love your papers. Do you know they took all my papers, they digitalized them. I can actually go online and see them. I'm so honored. So I want us to not always think so big that this has to be someone of celebrity status.
I agree.
If you have important information that you have gathered and researched over time that you think would contribute to the body of works in particular areas of scholarship, so on and so forth, don't let that information get lost, because oftentimes here's what happens. We had a member, matter of fact, she was one of the founding members of the UU Fellowship of St. Croix, and she had been a member of, she started the Writers Circle here in St. Croix. When she died, her children, she had collected all these manuscripts and everything. It had no meaning to her children. They tossed all of that. Had she realized that she could donate those papers someplace, they would have been available to folks in the future and to us now currently. So I want people to start thinking about what information have I generated, gathered, or contributed to that might be helpful to others, and where might I make this information available, donate it, so on and so forth.
That's true. I think that's important. The other thing that's important is, in some instances, there are video interviews while people are living.
Yes.
Okay, that are done by universities.
And
sometimes those are better than or oral interviews. Those are better than the papers, because the papers require you to read an awful lot. Whereas an oral interview, you can skip ahead
True.
and go through, and they generally will point you to, what they're talking about in tape 1 or tape 2 or tape 3.
Uh-huh.
The other thing is, remember that, even when you do donate, sometimes things happen.
Yeah.
And items aren't there, whether it's Meadville, and they have happened with Meadville, or it could be, the Army. They don't have the records. There was a fire. I mean, so just remember, as much as you want to keep and make sure people think about preserving, you got to remember that sometimes it's not all there, but you've made the effort to at least try and have it in a place where someone can get it.
I think what we've been talking about is very, very helpful. And I'm getting an idea in terms of thinking about a possible GA workshop to really encourage smaller congregations in ways that are manageable for them. Because not only is it that they don't recognize the significance and importance of it, but it seems like even more work. So if we can help them understand the importance of it, and also how to start simply without it being elaborate, it may be more doable, and they may begin to appreciate the process of archiving and gathering the information.
I think that's true. And let me tell you why it's so important. And I think this gets to the heart of it all. We generally don't know the person in the pew. We may know their name, we know their face. We don't know where they work or where they once were. We don't know much about their lives. And I can tell you that I learned more about people that I thought I knew by doing the research that I did.
Yeah.
And that's probably true for the people who are living now. We learn more about those people in our congregation at the memorial service, because that's when their lives are open to us all, and people tell us things we never knew.
Yeah.
And it's then you say, boy, is it a small world? I wished I had known.
Exactly.
So again, it gets to how we really don't know people. They don't share that. And it's not like that's what you do in church. You don't say, my name is.
Well,
you sit on committees. You serve the church.
Yeah.
You fundraise. You give money. You vote at meetings, but you don't necessarily know that person who is beside you in the kitchen washing dishes is a judge. Or a civil rights activist.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that the large churches, the large congregations have recognized that because of their size, they have to create small group ministries. And that's where people really get to know each other. And it might be in those places that, I don't know, some of these interviews, some of the gathering of information might happen, or
it's rarely interviews. I gotta just tell you, it's like picking up the phone and saying, Lydia, do you remember such and such and such?
Well, see, in my mind, that's an informal interview.
Okay, I want to just break it down so that you know that it's not as formal as you think.
Maybe I'm using the word interviews when I should be using the word conversation.
Yeah, conversation.
Because that's
it's
what
conversation. Because it's through conversation, for example, that I learned that one member gave the chalice, the only chalice the church had, because it didn't have one. It gifted the chalice, and that it was used, okay, for the first time when the member's friend, also a member of the church, died, and she marched it in the processional. And I mentioned that in the narrative. And this chalice is used every Sunday.
Wow.
But many people did not know that it was given, let alone given by a Black person.
Wow.
You know, and it's through conversations you learn who invited who to the congregation in the first instance. How they learned about you. They were invited. You know, they went to school with someone and, you know, they invited them. You learn who got married in the church because you don't necessarily see that.
Yeah.
You know, whose kids were christened or blessed.
Blessed. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This has been really, really powerful. And so I guess a question that I have for you now, I alluded to the fact that you all are looking at, you started with the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, and you're thinking about continuing the project for the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Have you begun that, or do you have a time frame for that?
Let me just tell you, while I was doing what I was doing, as I said, you know, the work involves looking at the universe of people of color. So you don't know who's living and who's not living. And I should tell you that at the time I was doing the project, people who were older were dying.
Yeah.
So, you know, the narrative that I hadn't written for X because they were living, I then wrote. And the church was able to use it for the announcement with a picture.
Wow.
You know, or the family was able to use it as the obituary.
That's coming full circle.
So it comes full circle.
Yeah.
And in one recent event, the minister was performing the obituary at the service, the funeral service. Had never, you know, Reverend Rollins was an interim. She had never met the woman. Yet my research on the woman's activities, and that's another point I'm going to get to, helped her write the eulogy. Because there were certain things about her service on the board, you know, how difficult it was, some of the things she may have said, and this gets to other materials. For example, not many church directories tell you what committees people were on. Most of the time, they may just list committees, but never list the names of the people on committees, X or RE, and then a list of all the names. So you may not have a clear picture of a member's activities. That's important. It's important information to know that the person who died was the treasurer for, you know, 3 years or 6 years, or a board president.
This is bringing me to another point in terms of other materials to access. I can't remember what research I was doing, congregational research, but I was reading through board minutes. Now newsletters are more current, but board minutes, you know, can go much further back. But I was searching for names. I was searching for reports of incidents that may have given me some indication about the history of BIPOCs or the interaction with BIPOCs in this particular congregation. So documents like this that would require endless reading, and you still may come up with nothing. You may have an idea of the culture of the congregation if you read enough of them, but it may net you nothing in terms of information about Black members or any of that.
Let me give you some sense of what I learned, okay? I have looked at annual meeting minutes.
Yes.
And annual meeting minutes are more important because that's where there are votes taken on officers and board members. And so if you're looking at someone who you know served on the board in a certain period of time, it's the annual meeting minutes that will reflect that. With respect to board minutes, it's rare I go to board minutes, okay? However, you might find newspaper articles when there has been an issue in the church that would reflect statements made by members, which might give you what you're looking for. And in our case, I can tell you that, you know, I often looked at sermons.
Yes.
Because the sermons really tell you, and you might learn about certain sermons from members in the congregation. For example, I will remember a conversation with one member who said, I will always remember when David Eaton got up in the pulpit and said, you won't accomplish anything. He was speaking about integration and collaboration and getting to know Black and white members. You won't achieve anything if you don't get into each other's houses. You know, that puts it front and center that it's not just showing up and sitting in a pew.
Yeah.
It's about getting into each other's houses. Well, that gives you some perspective on what the sermon might have been about. And if they organize the sermons in a way that you could find them, you might be able to find it, but at least you might have, through some witness, some member who remembers that sermon, that this is what he said.
Yeah.
And I was moved by that. That is what you want. Not so much the sermon. Does this help you?
Oh, very much so, very much so. It's also reminding me, we're talking a lot about congregational research and history. But given that the anthology on the presence of Black Unitarian Universalist clergy women, I thought a lot about Black clergy women and our evolution of our theologies. Now, it's not necessarily a focus in the anthology, but this is my train of thought with that. If I were to identify, whether it's Yvonne Sayon, Marjorie Bowens Wheatley, someone whose theology I wanted to track in terms of when, prior to becoming Unitarian Universalists, what was their theology? And then as they embraced Unitarian Universalism, did it remain the same? Did it change? Reading their sermons, I mean, everything we talked about today, looking for possible interviews with them, reading the newsletters. Most ministers have ministers' columns. I could see, looking at papers that they wrote. Marjorie Bowens Wheatley, I'm still trying to get a copy of this. She evidently wrote a paper while she was in seminary. I believe it was on Black women, Black UU women or something. I want to see that paper. I want to see what she was talking about and thinking about. So when we shift from congregational research to research on individuals, there are some similarities in terms of the research process, and then there are some variations.
Can I speak to Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley?
Please.
Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley, just like Yvonne, were members of All Souls.
Yes.
You never said to me, do you have anything on Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley?
Guess what? Years before I met you, and I cannot recall the name, Mara. Is
Yes,
that right?
Marge.
Yes, I was in touch with her years ago. I got copies of, she sent me the listing, and I identified the ones that I wanted. I wanted Yvonne Sayon. I wanted Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley. I wanted, because it also has the titles, so the person may not have been someone that I recognized, but their title was intriguing, and I knew I wanted a copy of that sermon. She had them transcribed, because these were the audio tapes. I had a small grant, so I paid for them. So I have some of those. Matter of fact, there's a anthology that's coming up. I can't speak too much about it, but they asked my permission, because I had the copy, if they could use a sermon from Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley. And so I have nothing but praise for All Souls, because the source of information that is accessible, because you all have been so intentional and have provided the fiscal and human resources that allow us to tap into some of your archives, is just amazing. I wish that was the case with our other congregations.
And so that you know, okay, Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley would have been in the next group, okay?
Yes.
And I had already done a short narrative on her.
Ah.
Okay. And, looked at some of the same readings and obituaries that you looked at to come up with her narrative.
Mm.
And I had been on her committee when she was a student and interning at All Souls, because David Eaton died when she was a student.
Wow. Mm.
And, she was still at Wesley and needed a committee to follow her.
Uh-huh.
And so there were two of us that the board selected to listen to her sermons at All Souls.
Wow.
So yes, I remember Marjorie.
You need to get in touch with Rosemary Bray McNatt, because I don't know if this was in Marjorie's will or if her husband decided this, but all her papers were given to Rosemary Bray McNatt, and Rosemary is supposed to be writing something.
Well, it's not a whole lot that I could say, but I'm just sort of telling you.
No, you have a perspective that I suspect Rosemary might not have, and you are a living historian in terms of the interaction with Marjorie.
Right. Well, I don't think many people realize that it was David Eaton. Well, she was a member before when she was a journalist.
Yes.
And when she was on TV in her other life.
Right.
And then she decided to leave All Souls and go off to UU World, okay? And then came back to school. I mean, her journey was an interesting journey to begin with.
Yeah.
But when David Eaton died, you see, because she wanted his, she admired him. She wanted him to be her mentor. So that when he died and the next minister was an interim, it was John Papandrew. And he was not interested in supervising anybody, and having that relationship. I mean, I mean, cut this out, but But you understand what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah.
But it just sort of tells you about, how depending upon who you ask, and also about, what information do you know? I mean, you went to the archives, which is perfect to get the sermons, but there may be other people
who had relationships
who
with
have
the individual.
relationships
Yeah.
who could fill
That
you in
first,
on.
that first person
It's
perspective.
that's right. It's that conversation,
It
finding
is.
out about the chalice.
Yes. This has been amazing, amazing. Let me just, I want to say just a few things about the Congregational Research Project that I'm involved with. So I got a small grant from the UU funding program. And a comment you made about volunteers. So in my mind, people were going to be interested in this project. They were going to be interested in volunteering to participate in everything. So the partner was UU Congregation of Atlanta. And because I did not get the full funding I requested, I asked permission from them to narrow it down to one congregation instead of two. I was going to do First Unitarian Church of Chicago and UU Congregation of Atlanta. So they gave me permission to narrow it down. Number one, so we created a Sunday worship service. I've forgotten the name of the service, but it had something to do with storytelling as a something tool, I don't know, spiritual tool or something, spiritual practice or whatever. And my sermon talk was about the significance and importance of research. And, at the end of the service, we had the information because this was on Zoom. And this was last year in the fall. And so all the information to contact me was on there. So I had 3 volunteers to contact me, and I figured, oh, more will contact me later. One of those volunteers dropped out. Another one of them relocated. Now, however, where she relocated, she decided she's in seminary and she's going to write a paper on Black Unitarians in Boston, which is very exciting. I have the one researcher and myself that are left. He is a seasoned, experienced researcher. He has done an amazing amount of research on UU Congregation of Atlanta. I mean, we knew some of these things, but he put it together in a video and everything. Their first Black member was the president of Clark Atlanta University. I cannot remember his name at the time. However, when he wanted to join, they hemmed and hawed and decided that he could attend, but he couldn't be a member. So yeah, now who they are today and who they were then is a totally different picture. But we have to tell the story, good, bad, or indifferent. And I know sometimes it's hard for some of our congregations because they were not necessarily portrayed in the best of light because their actions were not in integrity. I'm just mentioning, so we are concluding, I got an extension because things like circumstances, the congregation was relocating. So also most of their archives were at Emory University, which actually was a good thing because we didn't have to pillage around and try to find things. But it's been a learning experience. We've had a couple of Zoom gatherings where we brought in some of our consultants, John Leaker from Meadville Lombard. We brought in Joe Cherry, who did some oral interviews with some members who are now deceased. at First Unitarian Church of Chicago. And we talked about the different aspects of research and also how to include a womanist, feminist lens, how to include an anti-racist lens. I'll give you an example of one time really appreciating that lens. So we all know a little bit about Tuskegee Institute, and in the UU Congregation of Atlanta information that I was reading, it attributes this white minister as being one of the founders of Tuskegee. I had my anti-racism lens shoot up. It's like, and the reason I say it's an anti-racist lens, it's because I had done my research. I'd never heard of any whites. Yes, they contributed financially, but I was not aware of any that were founders. And so in researching that, what I realized probably happened is the writer ascribed more involvement than was actually the case. But had I not had an anti-racism lens on, I would not have been able to discern that and would have continued that erroneous information in my own research. That's a small example of having a lens that allows you to interrogate the information that you are exploring, researching, delving into, etc.
Well, let me just say, All Souls had a previous history of Unitarian Universalism in Washington in a book. It's called the Staples book. Yet there was no real discussion about Black members at all.
Yes.
And even Bernice Just, it was just that she was mentioned. There was no further discussion of who she was, the things she did, the things she did after she left All Souls. There was no picture. And so while I knew that going forward. And even when they were updating Unitarian Universalism in Washington, that perspective was not there because no one knew her or researched her.
Exactly. Yes. That invisibility.
So the invisibility is gonna be there.
Yeah.
Because the prior history wasn't written by us.
Exactly. And that's why we have to oftentimes dig. Look at the small innuendos, look at the very short little comment that might have, but
also look and lift up the educational background, the achievements of the people who were members, because that's not going to be lifted up.
Yeah, you're right.
And while I originally sort of looked at, well, what am I doing? Am I just sort of lifting up bright people? It's like, if I don't say it, no one will say it.
Exactly. But
the other thing I have to tell you, even though I have looked at a number of other people besides the 43, I have draft narratives and pictures of other people. I have stepped back because this is it's a very intensive project. The other thing is the pandemic helped me get through this because I wasn't going anywhere. And so I could sit at the computer all day long and Google.
Yeah.
But, there comes a point where you get tired of that. There also comes a point where it's depressing to read obituaries or read about a person's life and they're not here. You're excited that you found something.
Yeah.
and are amazed at who they were. But sometimes when you realize that they died at 50 or died suddenly or had Alzheimer's when they were brilliant and had amazing lives, it's very hard because you're the one who appreciates it.
Yes. Barbara, this has been amazing. I feel so rejuvenated and connected to you talking about this with someone that's as passionate.
You know, as you talk about all the resources you brought in to inform those who were working with you and yourself about what to look for, I didn't have that. It was just me. And I'm not an academic, I'm a lawyer, a retired lawyer. And so, you know, I was coming at it from, how do I honor and lift up people who were in the pews and show the strength of the diversity of this congregation that I loved and that they loved and felt at home. How can I share the fullness of who these people were with Black and white members now who may never have met them? So that was what I was operating from. And make it interesting. And I have to just tell you, the first person, Norma Boy, I never knew. She was the one who turned out to be the star. And by that I mean, she was one of the original founders of AKA. I never would have known who she was. She died at 97. She joined in 1950 and was the last living member of the AKAs.
Wow.
I never knew who she was.
Wow.
You know, and again, it was Wikipedia and my Googling her name that came up with this information about who she was.
Wow.
So like I said, Google is a great friend.
Yes.
You know, it's just that you never know what you're going to come up with. And you just have to keep Googling to just see what you uncover.
Yes, yes.
You know, so you're looking for everything, anything and everything.
Great. Well, I reluctantly bring this conversation to a close. I can't believe we've been talking for an hour. But this clearly, seriously, I cannot tell you enough how appreciative I am meeting you, talking with you. I rarely find someone who is equally passionate about research, congregational research, lifting up Black members and their histories and presence and their contributions. So thank you for this. This has been a treasure, a treasure. I will be in touch because the handbook that I'm putting together is to help other congregations to replicate some of the kind of research that you're doing, that I'm doing. And it's a start. It's a start.
It's a
so
start.
Thank you.
Take care.
You do the same, and let's be in touch.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us this amazing conversation. There will be lots more in the future to come. Greetings from Sister Source Incorporated.